Thank you, sir. Now I would like to briefly introduce the speaker of the day. CA Rafiq is a chartered accountant with experience of over 25 years in varied roles such as CFO, CIO, IT implementer, IT consultant, IT auditor, and COVID trainer. Presently, he is the managing director of Windsor Infotech Limited, which specializes in developing data analysis for auditors and BI tools for the management. Rafiq is a COBIT user and implementer since the first edition of COBIT released in 1996 and has facilitated in implementation review of COBIT for many enterprises across the world. He is a well-known COBIT evangelist and has made presentation on IT governance, IT assurance and COBIT implementation at International Conference of ISACA across the world, that is more than 14 countries, since 1998. CA Rafiq has also made presentations for ICAI, ICSI, ICWI, IAM, ISACA and other professional associations. He has conducted many training programs in India for IT and audit professionals in IS audit and COBIT. A brief profile of Mr. Siddiq Khan. He is a qualified chartered accountant in November 2012 and is a graduate in business administration from Symbiosis, Pune. After completion of his articles, he has been working as an IT consultant in a CA firm. He is passionate about working in technology-related areas. His special areas of interest are IT audit, COBIT, and CAT. With this brief introduction, I request Mr. A. Rafiq to address the people.
Good evening. Hello, I said good evening. Okay, that's better. Before I start my presentation, let me say that I'm delighted to be here. The last presentation I made for ICA Bangalore, incidentally, was on 25th January 2012, which was one day before the Republic Day, and this happens to be one day before the Independence Day this year. I'm glad that all of you are here. Before I start my presentation, let me just give you a brief introduction about the topic. I've spent more than 30 years in IT audit and also in technology. And when I was asked to speak on this topic, I'll just look at what is the perspective from which I should speak. There are two perspectives which you can talk about on this topic. One is from the technology perspective. What is cyber fraud, how technology impacts cyber fraud, and how you can use technology for doing various types of analysis, focused from the technology perspective. Second thing was from an audit perspective. Now, being an auditor, whether you are an internal auditor or an external auditor, you are supposed to know what is the impact of information technology on controls and what is the impact of information technology on frauds and what is the process you need to follow. So I decided to take the second path because I thought most of you are practicing chartered accountants and you need to know what is the impact of cyber fraud and what is the role you can play in terms of your current work for the audits you're doing, whether it's an internal audit or external audit, or second, also in terms of identifying, okay, what are the new avenues or opportunities for you to provide consulting in these areas. This presentation is going to be fast-paced because I found that I did a lot of research. So probably I spent about 30 hours on this particular topic, and I found a lot of interesting areas to cover. But we have only, I think, about 110 minutes, 105 minutes to cover this topic. And I thought we'll divide this into two broad areas. Rather than just talk about the theory of what is cyber fraud and what is the role of auditors, and also share my experience of some of the frauds which I've investigated, especially in the IT environment. I also thought we should also show you how software can be used. Software like Excel or audit software can be used. So we'll also have about 20 minutes of the presentation of different techniques which you can get to know how you can use this audit software like Excel or ECAT or TopCat. There are different types of software available which you can use for performing analysis, data analysis, as a part of your routine audit to identify if there is a possibility of cyber fraud. This is how the session is broadly divided. Ideally, I would prefer to have the question and answer whenever you want, but considering that we have a lot of distance to cover, I would suggest that we will have the last 15 to 20 minutes for questions. So any question you have, I suggest that you please hold it back. We'll take the questions at the end. Is that okay with you? Okay. One more thing I want to know. Last week, on the same day, we had a presentation on fraud protection, fraud prevention, and cyber forensics. My friend Anand gave the presentation. I just want to know how many of you were there. Oh, most of you are there. Good. Okay. So I have already seen the webcast of the presentation. I know what the path Anand has taken. Okay. So I do not want to repeat what he has already done, but I want to take from where he has given examples and take it further in terms of practically how this is going to help you. Let's get started. The agenda, I decided we'll have 4 key areas we would like to focus during this presentation. The first one is frauds. You are all aware of frauds, but there's something new about cyber frauds. We'll get the distinction between what is frauds and what is cyber frauds, and how does this change takes place. Next, we'll look at the regulatory requirements pertaining to cyber frauds, and also the compliance requirements, and what is the role of the auditors. Third, we'll look at the process which you need to follow if you have to do a cyber fraud investigation, or as in the course of your audit, you want to review whether the appropriate internal controls have been built into the system to ensure that the possibility of cyber frauds is minimized. What is the process you need to follow? What are the tools and techniques which you can use? We'll have a quick overview of that. And lastly, we'll also have some interesting case studies of frauds which have taken place, so that we can learn the lessons in terms of why did the fraud occur and what are the precautions to be taken. And finally, we'll have the presentation of the software techniques, and we'll have an interaction. This is broadly the agenda for today. Before I get started on this topic, frauds and cyber frauds, last week you had this presentation, fraud prevention and cyber forensics, and most of you of the last week are here. I just want to know quickly from some of you, is there any specific objective you have for attending this session? So if there is anything pertaining to fraud prevention or anything related to IT, you're going to be here. Or incidentally that you want to add to your CP hours, or what is the reason? Is there any specific objective you had? Okay. Okay, so you thought probably it was more generic in nature, and this you thought you will be much more specific. Okay, so I have planned in that way only. Yeah. Anything else? That's right. Okay, it's a part of the profession and you need to know. Okay, that's good. Anything else? Okay. What role an auditor can play? And the fact is, once you start reviewing the presentation, you get an idea, there are certain things which you're supposed to do. Okay, cyber fraud is not something which is unique or outside the purview of your duty. We have to review the internal controls to ensure that the cyber frauds are minimized. How does it fall in the purview? What are the regulatory requirements? And how we can do it? We'll discuss this as we go on. Okay. What is the need for fraud? Before we get into that, let's get an idea about what is fraud all about. If you look at the definition, they say fraud is defined as an intentional act involving the use of deception to obtain unjust or illegal advantage. This is what is given in the standard internal audit of ICI SIA 11. When you look at computer fraud or cyber fraud, so cyber fraud is a fraud that involves the use of computers and computers network, which means the same fraud, if it involves usage of computers or computer network, or it's conducted in a computerized environment. If the fraud has happened in a computerized environment, you can term it as a cyber fraud. You also need to get the distinction between fraud and errors. So if you look at the key characteristics of errors, errors are unintentional and there's no personal benefit which is supposed to be derived from this. And this could be on account of inefficiency, ignorance, incompetence, or there are no personal benefits. That's what happens in the case of errors. So if you have to take a particular situation where there's a loss to the company and you have to identify it has happened in a computerized environment, whether this is a fraud or it's an error, you can identify based on this, whether there's no personal benefit to anybody and it has happened on account of ignorance, incompetence, and there is no personal motive of gaining from that particular action. Then it's an error. What is the climate for fraud? How does fraud occur, or what is the conducive environment for a fraud? You find quite often it happens if there's an autocratic management, there are employees who are disgruntled who want to take revenge, or there could be unrealistic goals, like if you see Enron and various other companies, the company or the top management sets some unrealistic goals based on which you find there are no way to achieve these goals except the committing certain fraud. And we also have lack of clear responsibilities. You don't know who's supposed to do what. So in that case, it could be possible that there's a lack of access controls. So there could be one person who is initiating the transaction and is also able to complete the transaction, and the segregation of duties is not properly done. That also could lead to fraud. There could also be negative feedback. There's a lot of negative environment within the company. People are unhappy in the environment, or there's low organizational loyalty. The compensation is less, or poor training, or there will also be conflict of interest. These are some of the reasons for fraud happening. Primarily, when a fraud happens, you find there are three key factors which happen. One, there is a motive to commit a fraud. Second, the person who commits a fraud has the rationalization of why he is committing that particular fraud. He says the management has done this, they have not done this, I am doing this for my own reason. So he is quite rational, justified in doing what he is doing. And third, and most important thing, is there is an opportunity for fraud. If the controls are strong and have been well built into the system, you find the possibility of fraud gets reduced. But if there is an opportunity, then there is a possibility that frauds can occur. These are three things which happen. So if you look at in terms of an equation, you find this motivation plus opportunity plus rationalization would definitely provide an opportunity for people to embezzle, or it will provide temptations for people to embezzle. So what are the opportunities? If you look at the opportunities, where the opportunities are there for fraud to happen, there could be because of weakness in the internal control system. The monitoring is improper, inadequate. There's a new business location, so which means the business has been set up new, or the location is set up new, the employees are new, so there's an opportunity for more frauds to happen. Or there's a lack of documentation in the process, and there's unnecessary delegation. Quite often you see, for example, in the bank, when you go for verification of documents, you find they're supposed to have, dual control. And quite often you find that the dual control, the second key is also with the same person. Okay. Similarly, in many cases you find in computer systems, you find that the manager has to give the password, and quite often you find the manager's password is with the person who's actually doing the data entry. So which means it's actually not delegation, it's abdication. So that also could be an opportunity to commit frauds. And also groupism and power centers. What are the factors contributing to increase in the frauds? You find frauds are increasing. We'll come to statistics a little later. You find primary reason, or the most important reason why frauds occur, is because of inadequate internal controls. And as an auditor, whether you are a statutory auditor or whether you're an internal auditor, one of the primary responsibility is to review the internal controls. If the internal controls are inadequate, you find there is a very good potential for frauds to happen. And there's diminishing ethical values. And this contributes to about 48%, which means people by nature are not honest. They believe it's okay, even if I commit a fraud, it's okay. That, like if you look at corruption and other things, you find it's basically because of lack of ethical values. Just like we had this, Anshan against corruption, and they wanted the Lokpal bill to be passed. Now the problem is, bringing in any regulation is not going to remove corruption. It is not going to eradicate corruption. Along with the bill, whatever be the punishment, that's only going to be part deterrent. It's also important that we need to train people about the importance of living an ethical and honest life, teaching them how to live with values. And that's also going to be an important factor. So if the company doesn't have those type of ethical training, the company doesn't follow the code of ethics, you find there's a potential for fraud. In most of the top companies, you find that the first thing they have is what is called as the code of ethics, which clearly lays down how transparent or how honest and how fair the dealings are going to be between the suppliers, vendors, customers, etc. You also have reasons in terms of the failure on the part of the line personnel to act against deviations. There are certain deviations which happened and the remedial action was not taken. And lack of proper framework for monitoring, which means many frauds, if you see, it's because of lack of supervision. I'll also take you to the case studies. You'll get to know as to what is the reason why frauds have happened. And you'll be amazed, even if you look at the biggest fraud which involves billions, there are some basic things which are supposed to have been done. There are some basic controls which should have been placed, and those are not implemented. And that's why those frauds occur. You'll also find one of the reasons which happens is this inadequate background checks on employees. You don't know where that person is working, what is his previous job, what is his background, and they take people, and then you find that there's a potential for fraud. That's why you find most of the top companies, they do a very thorough background check for employees. Okay. In many cases, you may have internal controls, but the internal controls may fail to prevent frauds. So what are the reasons? This gives you some reasons. There could be lack of clarity in assigning the ownership, which means when you have assigned responsibility to the staff, you're not clear assigned the delegated and monitor the job. So that is one thing. The second thing is the controls which are supposed to be there are not embedded in the part of the business. Next, there's the inadequate oversight, which means you have internal controls, but there is a lack of supervision. Third, there's a failure to implement early warning signals. Quite often when fraud happens, it starts with a small amount. And sometimes fraud happens by accident. For example, let's say the cashier in a bank finds that he has got about 20,000 rupees surplus. And he has balanced his books. He's not able to find out why that has happened. So he decides that, okay, we don't know why it happened. So he keeps that money in the bank only, 20,000 rupees extra. We don't know why it happened. Later on, after a few days, he found that 20,000 rupees is because of a particular weakness or some particular incident. Now he says that manager has not detected there is a reason they need for him to use this money. He says, I'll put this money next week. Let me use it for 1 week. Then after 1 week, he found nobody has found out. Okay, and he needs for some more money. Then he says, why not try this? So next he tries for 25,000 rupees. And that's how the frauds increase. I'll give you a practical case of one of the fraud investigation we did for a government company where the person started in a very small way. Just he started with a fraud of 1,299 rupees. He made a payment, duplicate payment for 1,299 and he found the management did not find out. That is a duplicate payment. And then he found that the management is not able to find out. Then he says, I think this is a good opportunity. Next time he made for 5,000 rupees. Next time he made for 10,000 rupees. And in 3 years, he's reached a level for one fraud itself. In 1 day, he made a fraud of about 21 lakh rupees. And totally over a period of 3 years, he committed a fraud of about 6 crore rupees. More than 6 crore rupees. What is the modus operandi he followed? I'll discuss this a little later. So just to give an idea that fraud sometimes happens in small measures. And lack of periodic assessment. It's not enough if you have controls. It's also important to check whether the controls are working. As a human race, we've always been evolving. So evolution is a never-ending paradigm of the human race. So in terms of the technology also, you find there are changing methods. So as man has evolved, the frauds also have evolved. We'll see from a manual system where we're auditing through ticks and pencils. Okay, now we have clicks on the mouse. Okay, so which means the methods have changed. Similarly, if you had to commit a fraud earlier, the methods were different. And now in a computerized environment, the methods are completely different. Similarly, as technology evolves, the methods and techniques to commit fraud also have evolved. We'll see that as we go on in the case which I'll discuss with you as to how this person also evolved. When the banks moved and when this company, bankers moved over to RTGS, where it was online, how this person also evolved his methodology and he became much more convenient for him to commit fraud. And finally, because that only he was caught after some period of time, but with the evolving technology, he also evolved his technique or method. So once a person gets addicted to a fraud, committing a particular fraud, you will find that this person becomes much more sharper, and as the technology evolves, he is the one who will be in the forefront of technology, who will start using technology in a much more effective way. That's why you find it's always with technology, you have viruses and malware and so many other things. You find people also keep on coming with newer and newer ideas. I'm sure most of you would be receiving, if you look at your email, and now it has also comes on a SMS, that you won so many $1 million. And so that has become a never-ending phenomena. And that's all process now automated. And even the response for that, if you respond to it, that process is also automated. So they will know how many percentage responding, and for that is an automated response which is sent. And once you respond to it or somebody calls, then that is delegated to one more department which takes care of the follow-up, personal follow-up. Because once you give the contact details, then you have to follow up personally. So there is a separate department which takes care of the follow-up. And once that has been confirmed, there is another department or team of people who will take care of the personal, this one. They have to meet you personally, collect the cash, or you open a bank account and see that the money is transferred. So there are a lot of segregation duties between them to ensure that they send, let's say, 1 million emails. Out of that 1 emails, probably they get 0.1%. So they don't have time to go through all that for this one. So they have an automated process based on which they know how many have responded. And there is an automated reply which goes to them. And based on the details you provided, then they filter out and say, okay, what next action is to be taken. Okay, technology has become all pervasive. Now if you look at the technology causes a disruption in the way business processes are provided or the services are rendered. Now, if you look at the technology, now we talk about cloud computing, we talk about mobile computing, you have big data. So there are newer and newer technologies that are coming in. If you look at banking itself, the way we used to do banking, if you had to find a bank balance, if the check was cleared, we had to go to a particular counter. Now we don't need to do that at all. We can do most of the banking transactions on the online itself. Similarly, you have to make any purchases. You can buy anything you want directly online. So there are newer technologies which keep on coming. That is, you will find there are emerging capabilities of technology which is provided by newer and newer technologies, and this provides for newer business models. The newer the technology, the greater the need to implement appropriate controls. So how do we ensure that technology is used for achieving the business objectives without compromising on controls? That's what we will be discussing as we go on. CERTIN, which is the body which has been set up by the Ministry of Information Technology, did a survey recently of what are the type of information technology threats which are faced by Indian enterprises. And based on the research, they found there are basically 5 key information technology threats. One is hacking. You find thousands of websites of government organizations and many other enterprises have been hacked and defaced, or frauds have been committed. The lack of business continuity plan. There's a lack of adequate risk management, and the over-reliance on key staff, which means there are key staff who are there who have got control of everything, and they have the opportunity to commit a fraud, and the lack of required clauses in this service level agreement. When the service has been outsourced to a provider, technology provider, what is the service you're supposed to provide, what are the controls you're supposed to take care, those are not there. And this gives rise to threats which can lead to exposures and losses. If we just look at the magnitude of the risk in the case of a technology environment, we just take up a simple case of a company which uses SAP. We have this concept of segregation of duties. The basic concept is the maker and checker concept, which means any task which has been done has to be verified by another person. Okay? So it means no single person should be able to initiate and complete the transaction through its full life cycle. Or, in simple terms, you say the idea is don't give someone the match and the gas. Now, if you look at SAP applications, you have about 20,000 transaction combinations which can cause risk. Which means there are different types of transactions which, not properly configured, can give rise to a risk. Okay, so it's important when you are installing SAP has all the controls which are required. But it's important that you configure it as per the enterprise requirement to ensure that proper controls are implemented. So you should know the business process, you should know the enterprise policy, and based on that you should be able to implement it as per the organization structure and the enterprise policies so that the possibility of frauds are minimized. Now we have discussed about fraud. Let's look at what is computer fraud. Now, the definition from the US Department of Defense says computer fraud is any illegal act for which knowledge of computer technology is essential for its perpetration, investigation, or prosecution. Which means anywhere you are using computers for committing a fraud, that's a computer fraud. So if you look at examples, it could be through unauthorized use. So it means you're not supposed to use a computer or the software, you're unauthorizedly accessed and use the software. You have modified the data which is there in the software, or you modified the software, you copied the software, and you also destroyed the software. So all these could be possibilities or examples of computer fraud. Now this is an interesting comment from the website of the Cybercrime Investigation Cell of Mumbai. So what do they say? The person who commits the computer fraud uses technology as his weapon. Now we use the same to nab him. So it means if the fraudster using technology to commit a fraud, you have to use technology itself to be able to catch him. So it means you need to have good understanding of technology to be able to review and analyze, investigate and prevent and detect computer fraud. Okay. So what is the type of knowledge you need to have? What are the skill sets you need to have? Where frauds can happen in a computerized environment? We'll discuss this as we go on. So the key principle in this particular case is you cannot catch a car chasing. You cannot chase a car on a horse. Okay, which means if somebody is racing a car, now if you have to chase him, then you have to find out a car which is probably much superior to him or much more faster. Okay, so we cannot use the older methodology of trying to catch on a horse. Or like they say, no, you cannot fight a war with swords with an enemy who is fighting with machine guns or AK-47. Similarly, you cannot fight an enemy who is fighting with AK-47 and machine guns for an enemy who is actually fighting with the Air Force. So depending on the type of technology they are using, you should have the adequate technology. The same thing happens in the enterprise also. So what are the common types of cyber fraud or computer fraud? So one, there could be physical theft. There could be identity theft, which means you have a user ID which is valid and somebody uses that user ID and commits a fraud in your name. And you find many cases, this particular things have happened, where some user in a bank, because they're in a hurry, they trust somebody else, they give the user ID, and this person has committed the fraud using that particular user ID. So if the user ID of a particular person has been used, the person responsible for that particular fraud is the person whose user ID has been used, unless they're able to prove that they have taken adequate precaution. So it means if you have shared your password and somebody has been able to do a transaction which is result in a fraud, then you will be held personally responsible. You also have information threats, which are theft, which means the information which is supposed to be the currency of the 21st century, especially in the modern enterprises. If this information has been stolen, then that's also an example of a computer fraud. And this could be pertaining to various strategic areas of the business or pertaining to the financial results of the business. Or there could also be copyright infringement, which means copying of the software of the company. Why do frauds happen in a computerized environment? More and more the frauds are increasing in a computerized environment. The reason is, quite often it's nearly impossible to detect the fraud. In a manual environment, probably you can scan through the cash book, you can do some vouching or auditing. Based on the manual techniques, you can identify fraud wherever there is a possibility. Okay? Or there are so many, a person who has committed a fraud needs to have access to multiple records to be able to commit the fraud. Whereas in the case of computerized environment, you need to have access to the computer. And then once you have access to the computer, depending on the type of software which has been used, you can commit a fraud much more easily. So which means in a computerized environment, if the controls are weak, it's much more easier to commit a fraud at a much more bigger scale. And second, if detected also, it's next impossible to prove. Quite often it has happened that frauds have happened and the person who has committed the fraud has become a consultant and you have not been able to prove the fraud. So you need to have some special skills to be able to investigate, document and prove that this person has committed that particular fraud. And quite often if it's proved also, it's quite often not possible to convict that person. And if convicted, it's also possible that it's difficult to recover that money because the money would have lost trace. You don't know where the amount has been transferred. Now the problem is also compounded because you have a network of computers and these are networked throughout the world. So you don't know from where the transaction has been initiated to which account has been transferred. And most of the people who commit this fraud are experts in using technology and they ensure that the trace is lost or the trace is very difficult to go back to the source, to trace it back to the source. Now in spite of all these challenges, still you find that if you follow a rigorous mechanism of controls and you review, it's still possible to identify, detect computer frauds. Let's look at computer crime. If you look at the United Nations Manual on Prevention and Control of Computer Crime, they have classified this computer crime into 5 broad categories. So it could be committing a fraud by manipulation of the input, output or throughput of the computer system, or it could be computer forgery or deliberate damage or unauthorized access to computers or unauthorized reproduction of computer programs. These are the specific examples they give. Let's look at further. If you look at in terms of manipulation of input, this gives you some examples of what is meant by manipulation input, which means the input which is being given into the computer. For example, somebody has deposited 20,000 rupees, you modify this to 2 lakh rupees. Okay, so that's fraud by manipulation input. Manipulation of inactive accounts. This is one of the classic cases where most of the frauds, especially in the banking sector, have happened, where the dormant accounts, people who have not operated the account for quite a long time, you find they come after 3-4 years and they find the money is gone. Adding phantom vendor names or payroll accounts, which means you add fictitious vendor names or employee names and make payment to them. Okay, you change the rate tables. For example, the interest rate for a particular deposit is a particular, let's say 8% or 10%. You change it to 60% or 40%. Okay, similarly, loan amount, you have taken a loan. The loan amount is, let's say 18% or 14%. You change it to 3% or 4%. And generally, if the interest is being computed with the through the computer, you find quite often you don't verify because you assume that the computer is doing it correctly. There could also be the credit limits which have been changed, which have been set, or there could be changing exceptions. There are some exceptions which have been set, and you change the exception report or the parameters for that. So it's important to ensure that you are able to detect frauds. So what does fraud detection mean? This refers to the analytical and other procedures that enable discovery of anomalies. You should be able to see if there are any exceptions which have happened, and you should be able to detect that. And this could happen not only through the manual procedures, but more so in a computerized environment through automated procedures or by using audit software. How it can be done, we'll see it a little later. So what does fraud detection involve, and what is the distinction between fraud detection and fraud investigation? So if you look at fraud detection, we are looking at identifying systems that often indicate fraud is being or has been committed. So based on the symptoms, we should be able to know what is this fraud and how this has been committed. Fraud investigation, next step, once you know the fraud has happened or possibly is happening, so you review and examine the evidence to identify what is the extent of fraud and whether the fraud has really happened, and if so, how to gather the evidence for reviewing and confirming the fraud. And quite often in a computerized environment, when you have to do a fraud investigation, the computer is going to be the most important ally, because you have to use the computer itself as a tool for doing the fraud analysis. What is the impact of all this technology for the CA? For a chartered accountant, you find the more technology is being used, there is more and more requirement for CA with the solid information technology skills. Now, when you say solid information technology skills, which means that person should be able to design, integrate, and implement advanced software systems. So it means you don't have expertise not only in using or implementing Tally, but you should also have knowledge of some key software like database software and ERP software. You should also be able to link the hardware with the software and know what are the different layers of software and how do they interact and interface with each other and how do they produce the result. Once you know that, then you will be able to build in the controls within the software. You'll find that technology will keep on advancing. Like they say, technology follows the Moore's law, where they say every 18 months the speed of the processor doubles. And that has kept pace in the last 20 to 30 years. Now, I remember 1990, we bought one 10 MB hard disk, which is such a big box. And now you find one USB itself has about 16 GB, which is very, very powerful. So in terms of speed of the computers itself, it has gone drastically. So technology will continue to evolve. More and more you find that anything you do is impacted by technology. So if you wake up in the morning till the time you go to sleep, you find what are you doing, probably 80 to 90% of the activity you're doing or the service you're receiving is impacted by technology. In fact, they say the modern sophisticated car, if you buy a car which is, let's say, of a medium category, you find the number of processors, minimum processor it has about 50. So it's more like you're driving actually a mobile data center. And these interact, and there are inbuilt processes which interact. And there are also processes which interact with the company itself. You go to sophisticated advanced cars, there are also this process which interact directly with the company. So if your car needs maintenance, directly that information will be available to your supplier. And he'll say, sir, he'll call up and tell you that probably your car needs servicing, or this particular part is going to break down, it's better that you bring it for servicing. So that's how the technology is getting embedded into the modern day appliances or usage articles. Many of the traditional skills which we had, the core competency area we had in terms of the compliances, accounting, finance, etc., they have to be blended with technology to be effective, to be produced. For example, if you are providing income tax services to your client, you find that if you don't know how to do e-filing, you cannot really provide service to your client. So more and more you find the government will start insisting that whatever service you provide to the client, you have to be technology enabled. So what are the type of skills which you require for fraud, for analyzing or fighting frauds? One is you need to have analytical skills, which I think as a chartered accountant we have in abundance. To be able to analyze the information which is there and come to a conclusion as to what has happened or what is the process which is being followed. That's something which is very, very important in the case of fraud investigation. Communication skills, interfacing with different types of people, understanding the business process and relating to them, that's another thing. And the third and most important thing is the technology skills. We need to buffer up our technology skills so that we know how technology is deployed within the enterprise, how controls can be deployed in technology, and how we can review and evaluate these controls to check whether these controls are available and the available controls are adequate and appropriate. In addition to that, if you're a non-CA, you also need to have understanding of accounting and business, knowledge of the laws which are there pertaining to the civil and criminal laws, and other fraud, legal and fraud related issues. We'll see this a little later as we go on. You also need to know about human behavior or psychology in terms of how does a fraudster think. So they say if you have to detect a fraud, you need to think like a fraudster in terms of what is his thinking, how did he go through this. I'll discuss with you a little later when I discuss the fraud which we investigated, how that person was thinking and how we had to revise the methodology we are using for fraud investigation as we discovered various things. Okay, having discussed and understood what is fraud and what is computer fraud and the distinction between fraud and computer fraud, now let's look at the regulatory requirements and what is the role of the auditors. Now currently we are on the assumption that computer fraud is something which is not really related to what we do. So most of you could be doing tax audit or maybe doing financial audit or maybe doing statutory audit or maybe doing audit of companies. You find that computer fraud, maybe our clients are using computers to some extent. It's not nearly our responsibility to detect this computer fraud because we don't have those type of skills. Okay, I'll show you as we go on as to what are the current regulatory requirements and what is the role we can perform, what is the role we need to perform and how we can deliver those type of services. All of you must have heard of this Information Technology Act 2000, which was passed in the year 2000. This was enacted on 17 May 2000, and India at that time became the 12th nation, and it's supposed to be based on the UN model laws, and this act was amended in 2008. When the Information Technology Act was introduced, it was the first information technology legislation in India, and they also followed the rules for this. In 2008, the major amendment was made based on which the corporates were also made responsible for certain things. Now it also recognized computer crime. Now you find it recognizes and punishes offenses by companies or individual employees. There are specific sections pertaining to that. Okay, like sending offensive messages using electronic medium, dishonestly stolen computer resources, unauthorized access to computer resources, identity theft, cyber terrorism, publishing or transmitting obscene material. It also provides for comprehensive investigation. Now the question is, you may say these are all within the outside the purview of audit. So this is not within our role. Currently, what you're doing, we are looking at financial data, we are reviewing the financial information, or we are doing the financial performance or results, and we are not really responsible for that. So my response for that is, if you look at these 4 types of IT, if there is any issue pertaining to income tax, the CA provides the service. If there is any issue of the client pertaining to indirect taxes, the CS are there to jump and say, yes, we provide services in indirect tax. Anything we have, we update ourselves, we can provide services. The same way, if you look at IT in terms of international taxation, we have many of our CAs who got the expertise, or we can get the information and provide the consulting for international taxation. Now, the 4th and most important aspect is pertaining to information technology. Now, we know based on the Information Technology Act, that Information Technology Act applies to not only individuals but also to corporates. Now my question is, how many CAs provide services in information technology areas, especially from the regulatory perspective of Information Technology Act compliances? Now as per the Income Tax Act, there are certain compliances. As per the indirect taxes, there are certain compliances. As per the international taxation, there are certain compliances and there is consulting required. The CA can provide the service. Now if I ask how many of you are practicing the Information Technology Act or company law, I'm sure most of you say, yes, we are not really doing that service. The fact is, if you can understand company law, you can understand income tax, you can understand service tax or VAT or anything for that matter, understanding Information Technology Act is very, very simple. It has only about 80 sections and they are very, very simple to understand. Once you read this, you find there are a lot of services you can provide. Quite often you find the client don't even know that this act is applicable to them, what are the provisions of this act and what is going to be the impact of the failure. Okay, so they will come to realize only when certain things hit them. Like one CEO was arrested because some particular mail which was sent or something which was posted on the website. And then the rose said, oh, as per the Information Technology Act, we are responsible. Okay. Similarly, if we study the Information Technology Act and the rules and know what are the provisions they need to comply, this could be an area for CS to provide compliance services. For that, it's important that we need to invest time. This also impacts, Information Technology Act also impacts the other services you provide like compliance services because it deals with electronic information. It also talks about recognition for the electronic records. So we should know basically if you're doing even compliance-related audit, whether it's tax audit or company audit, we need to know what is this Information Technology Act and rules all about, and how does it impact us. So in this presentation, I don't have detailed time to go through that, but I'm just giving you pointers that this is something we need to be aware of, on which we need to invest time. Let's look at some key provisions of this Information Technology Act. If you look at Chapter 9 of this IT Act, IT means not income tax, but Information Technology Act. Okay, Section 43 says who are without permission of owner of the computer secures access. Okay, which means he just accesses that computer, not necessarily through a network, directly accesses. He downloads copies or extracts any data, or introduces or causes to introduce any viruses, damages or causes to be damaged any computer resource, or he causes disruption. In all these cases, there is a responsibility, and this is a civil wrong. Similarly, if you look at the responsibility for the management, any enterprise, whether it's an enterprise or it's an individual, whatever be the constitution, if they are collecting information, which is personal information from individuals, for example, let's say you have a bank account or you have a credit card, you are providing some personal information. Okay, you go to a hospital and then you give some personal data. All these are supposed to be sensitive personal data or information. Now, the Information Technology Act vests the responsibility of protecting this personal information with the person who is collecting that information. If this information is used or hacked by some other person and misused, then this company is responsible, and the CEO and the stakeholders legal action can be taken against them. So if you look at the responsibility for protection of information, who are the people who have provided the responsibility? Where a body corporate possessing, dealing or handling any sensitive personal data or information. Okay. What's personal data information? Personal data information could be, let's say, your age, or your health data, or your financial data. Like that, there is a lot of personal data which is not supposed to be shared, okay, with anybody else. If that is shared, that company collects the data. For example, if you've got a bank account, the bank has all the details of your personal transactions. Similarly, if you have a credit card, the company has got all the information about your credit card. Similarly, you go to a hospital, the company has information about all your medical condition. If that information is shared or accessed by unauthorized persons, that company is held responsible. Similarly, the Information Technology Act also provides, so what are the type of crimes which can be committed, and it gives you a list of the crimes. It could be cyber terrorism, cyber pornography, defamation, like that. There are different types of crimes which are there. Okay, if you look at the categories of cyber crimes, they are put into 3 categories. It could be crime against the property, or against the person, or against the government. Similarly, there is a Section 85 which gives a provision pertaining to the body corporates, which specifically for the companies. Who is the person who will be held responsible if it is done by a body corporate? Recently, in July, there is a national cyber security policy which was released. I'm sure most of you may not be aware. So if you look at the cyber security policy, if you review the condition, I thought it's important that you should know about this. It has got a vision, mission, objectives. We'll quickly run through it. So this is a notification on 2nd July. Now it talks about the vision. What is the vision of this particular cyber security policy which was released by the central government? To build a secure and resilient cyberspace for citizens, business and the government. And what is the mission? It gives you the mission. Why did I bring this into the picture? If you look at the objectives, they say the objective is to create a secure cyber ecosystem, to create an assurance framework, to strengthen the regulatory framework, to enhance and create national and sector level mechanisms for ensuring compliance. So which means, just like you have information technology or income tax compliances, similarly there are opportunities for ensuring policy compliance pertaining to cyber security. Now this gives you the different strategies which the government is following for ensuring a implementation of the national cyber security policy. So if you see here, that are pertaining to securing cyber ecosystems, creating an assurance framework. What is an assurance framework? Now if you see here, this gives you an idea about what is the assurance framework all about. So adoption of global best practices in information security and compliance, create infrastructure, enable implementation of global security best practices, identify and classify information infrastructure, ensure the secure applications. Now all this provides an opportunity. For example, you get expertise in how to audit application or provide security for application, you can provide this as a service. So it means there are a lot of opportunities for providing IT-enabled services. So I suggest you download this and read this detailed document. It's only about 4 pages. This National Cyber Security Policy. Then you'll get an idea about what are the opportunities for you. Similarly, if you are a company, you have this clause 49 of the Companies Act. which says the CEO and the CFO certification is required. Now, if you look at CARO, you find CARO talks about adequate internal control procedures and its responsibility to identify major weakness in internal controls. It also talks about whether any fraud on or by the company has been noticed or reported, the auditor is supposed to report it. Okay, if the fraud has happened in a computerized environment, also you're supposed to report. Okay, similarly, if you look at audit evidence, what is that you're looking at? You're looking at whether you are getting sufficient appropriate audit evidence. In a computerized environment or an electronic environment, most of the evidence is electronic or digital. So you need to know how to access this information which is available earlier in the form of records, registers, books, files, etc., which is available now in digital form. So if you have to access this information digitally, you should know what is the type of hardware, software you need to access, how does it work, and how to access this information. Similarly, you find that what you are providing is credibility. When you are through the assurance, you are providing assurance on the credibility of information. If that is the case, if that information is electronic, how do we provide assurance on this information which is electronic in nature? We perform test checks. Now, whether these test checks are valid in a computerized environment, it's quite often possible that in a computerized environment, you can do 100% checks using the software itself. So if so, you should know what are the type of tests you can perform, what are the software you can use. Okay, let's go further. Similarly, if you look at policies and procedures from the point of internal control, this is what you're looking at. Whether the transactions which have been all recorded, they accurately and fairly reflect the transaction. Now the question is, if the same thing is available electronically, how do you provide assurance on this type of information? Similarly, when you're looking at transactions are recorded or there's a proper authorization, if this information is available in electronic media, how do you ensure that this is being done? So this is where it becomes important that you know what are the features or what are the key clauses of the Information Technology Act. You should also be able to identify what is material. If you look at from the perspective of the internal auditor, there is a standard called SI 11 which focuses on fraud. It defines what is a fraud. Paragraph 6 talks about this one of the standard on the internal audit. Basic principle says the auditor should exercise due professional care, competence and diligence expected of him while carrying out the internal audit. Now the question is, if there is a highly computerized environment and if you don't have the competence to understand how the technology works, then you should take a decision whether you're going to acquire the requisite skills or you need to abstain from the audit. So what is important is the auditor has to possess the requisite skills and knowledge or use a person who's got expertise in that particular area. There's no doubt that the management is responsible for implementation, but as an auditor, you're responsible for reviewing how the controls have been implemented. So primarily what you're looking at is there should be a controlled environment, and these controls are embedded in the information technology environment. As we go on, we'll also see how these internal controls are embedded in the information technology environment. So similarly, you see, you have to look at the information systems and communication. You look at the operating effectiveness of the policy and procedures. Now, these policy and procedures are inbuilt into the system. If so, how do we review and evaluate whether this policy has been implemented? For example, let's say, as per the Income Tax Act, you are not supposed to receive or pay 20,000 rupees in cash. Okay, so if you do a manual review of the cash book, you can review and then find out are there any transactions about 20,000 rupees in cash. But if the same thing has happened in a computerized system, whether they're using Tally or SAP, can you use the software itself, query and pick up that information directly? You can definitely do that. If so, you can do a 100% review of the transactions. So if a fraud has happened, what is your responsibility to communication? This particular standard talks about this. This gives you similarly, if you look at from the external audit perspective, there is a standard called SA 240, which says the auditor's responsibilities relating to fraud in audit of financial statements. I'll not get into details of this. This is just to give an indication that fraud areas are actually covered in the current regulation itself as applicable to a CA. Similarly, we've got SA 3A15, which talks about assess the risk of material misstatement due to fraud. So it says that if there is a risk of material misstatement due to fraud, these are considered a significant risk. So what is important is to understand the entity's related controls, including control activities relevant to such risks. Now the issue is, these controls which are earlier inbuilt through manual procedures and systems, now these are available in computerized environment they are built in the controls, built into the IT, information technology itself. And these are embedded in the operating system software, the database software, or the application software. So in that case, you need to know what are the relevant controls which are applicable to the environment and how these controls have been inbuilt into the software to be able to review and confirm whether the controls are available, adequate, and appropriate. So this talks about various types of frauds in a computerized in a financial reporting environment. So this gives you some examples. Now the reason why I am highlighting this, all these frauds are possible in a computerized environment and they can be done much more easily. And that's why the responsibility which you had in auditing, the auditing standards which are applicable for a manual environment are applicable even for a computerized environment or a technology environment, and more so in a technology environment, because this can be done much more easily and without leaving a trace. So what is the role of the auditors? So this gives you a summary. You need to identify what are the high risk areas and what are the loopholes in the system in terms of the control weakness. You need to assess whether the internal controls which are implemented are adequate for the needs of the enterprise, and based on this you should be able to provide guidance or recommendations on how controls need to be improved. What are skills required? You need to have knowledge of the standards which are applicable for the audit criteria. You also need to have some good understanding of how technology works. Okay? You also need to know how you can use software for doing the audit. So if you start with what is called a cyber fraud risk assessment, which means you identify, just like you do a fraud risk assessment, similarly you need to do what is called a cyber fraud risk assessment, which means you need to assess, on account of using computerization, what is the impact on controls, how do controls operate, and what is the impact of the risks which are prevalent and how these risks have been mitigated by implementing controls. So just like maintaining the accounts is a responsibility of the management, maintaining the controls is a responsibility of the management, similarly doing risk assessment is also the responsibility of the management. The auditor is responsible for reviewing and confirming whether these controls are working as envisaged. Okay, this gives you some simple examples. Let's say if you look at cyber fraud, which talks about physical theft, what is the likelihood, what is the impact, and what are the internal controls which can be built in. So if you see here, if you talk about physical theft, you need to have internal controls which talks about key cards, security guards, digital locks, circuit cameras, backup and recovery plan. Similarly, if you look at identity theft, which means somebody can hack and use their identity, the likelihood is medium, the impact is high. So what is important is you need to have unique user IDs, you need to have password policy which is very strict, you need to have firewall which prevents access from unauthorized users, you also need to have incident response policy in terms of if somebody has access or hacked that system, how do you respond to it. And you also need to delete terminated employee access as soon as they're terminated. Similarly, if there's information theft, what is the likelihood, what is the impact, and what are the internal controls you need to have. One of the main controls you can have for information theft is segregation of duties. You also need to have access logs in terms of who can access the information. You also need to have transaction logs. All the transactions which are recorded, there is a time and date stamp and the user ID stamp. You also have security violation, which means any person who has access, you know who has accessed at what time. You also need to encrypt the key data or important data. Similarly for copyright infringement. So for implementing controls, for taking care of all these measures, what is important is you need to look at information controls in an IT environment from a holistic perspective. And that's where you have what is called as a GRC framework. So the GRC framework deals at a holistic level, covers not only the governance aspect, it also covers the risk management and the compliance aspects. It deals not only with the overall strategy, process, people, and technology, it also talks about the ethical behavior. Okay, so you need to have a comprehensive approach for reviewing controls in a computerized environment. So what does GRC deal with? This gives you an idea about what GRC is all about. So primarily, it is applicable for corporate governance. You need to have system of enterprise risk management, and you need to have corporate compliance. You find most of the companies which they have this what is called as a GRC, which is specifically mentioned, or enterprise risk management is specifically mentioned in the annual report. And this is a requirement aspect, clause 49. So if you look at the overall understanding of what is GRC all about, you find the distinction, primarily the responsibility of the governance to evaluate, direct and monitor how technology or the business process are run, and those are called as governance process. Similarly, the management has to run, build and monitor the system, and they have to ensure that the strategy which has been outlined by the senior management is executed. So you have the roles and responsibility clearly defined in terms of who has to do what and the reporting mechanism for that. So what is the role of the auditors in this? So being experts with their core competency in accounting and various other areas, it's also important that you need to know how to investigate or audit this computerized environment. So you need to adopt a systematic approach for doing this. We'll see later on as how it can be done. So if you look at from the holistic perspective, if you're auditing an enterprise which is using computers, you need to look at not only the financial data, but you also need to look at the process and the systems which produces this financial data. So you need to look at the principles, policies, and the framework, especially from the fraud point of view, as to what are the possibilities of fraud, what controls are there. We'll also see as we go on, we'll see some case studies, you'll get an idea about how frauds have happened because of basic lack of controls. You also need to understand what are the processes which are followed, how business processes which are executed in a manual environment are now being executed in a computerized environment. What are the relevant controls and how these controls are inbuilt into the IT. You also need to understand the organizational structure, how segregation of duties was done in a manual environment, and now in a computerized environment, how the segregation of duties has been done, and whether it leads to any conflict of interest or whether it leads to any issues of fraud happening. In most of the cases, wherever frauds have happened, you look at even the biggest fraud, you find there are some basic tenets of internal controls which have been missed. I'll show you this a little later as we go on. You also need to look at the organizational code of ethics in terms of what is the culture, ethics and behavior. Does the management promote a proper ethics policy? You also need to look at how information flows within the enterprise in terms of where does it get generated, where does it get processed, who has got access, where it is stored, who can have access to that information at different stages of processing of that information. You also need to understand what is the information technology architecture of the enterprise in terms of, okay, what is the information technology components which are being used, how are they deployed. You also need to look at the people skills and competencies. Having understood what are the regulatory requirements, now let's look at what are the processes, how do we investigate or review controls in a computerized environment or review computer fraud. Now if you can understand this one slide, I think we all can go home. If you see here, what we are looking at is an IT-enabled environment. Primarily, any enterprise is started by a set of stakeholders, and the stakeholder needs is value creation. For the investment they are making, they want to have value creation. Okay, so they run certain IT-enabled business process or they provide certain services, and you find that a business process or services which are provided, they are set up an organizational structure to provide the service. There is a particular information technology infrastructure which is created or deployed. There is a regulatory requirements for applicable to that particular business environment, and there's data or information which is processed. What is important for the enterprise is to have a structure of process which ensures all of these are performed in a controlled environment. Now, whether you are a statutory auditor, whether an IT auditor, whether an internal auditor, whatever be the type of audit, you need to review whether these controls are implemented as per the required criteria. So, if you look at audit, what audit requires is primarily collection and evaluation of evidence as per the audit objectives. Okay, so it's important you need to know where the audit evidence lies. You should be able to gather, review, and evaluate whether the audit evidence, based on the audit evidence, whether the controls are in place. Now let's look at further. Quite often, to audit in a computerized environment, you use what is called as a data analysis software. Little later, we'll have a quick demo of how you can use data analysis software or techniques. The advantage of using audit software is the speed at which you can verify the transactions or review the transactions. We'll see that as we go on. Why do you use data analysis of finding fraud? This gives you the reason. You can use it for proactive fraud analysis. Now, what is CAT? This is where they say you need to know a CAT. In fact, they say wherever there's a mouse, there has to be a CAT. And CAT is spelled as CAAT. Computer-aided audit techniques or computer-assisted audit techniques. Okay. Now, CAT does not necessarily mean some sophisticated software. It could be as simple as software which is Excel, or it could be audit features which are available in Tally, or that could be reporting modules which are there in the application software, or there are also software which are add-on to Excel like ECAT, TopCat, Active Data, etc. Or there could be specific audit software like ACL, IDEA, or SoftCat, which can be used for performing data analysis on a technology environment. Okay, when you're using CAATS, this is what you should be looking at in terms of the approach. What are the specific objectives you want to perform? What are the specific objectives you have for the audit? Based on the specific objective of the audit, you'll decide what is the period for which you need to collect the data, and you'll find where the data is there, what are the sources in which the data is available, what is the format in which data is available, and then you decide what are the tests you're going to perform and how you're going to perform. And once you perform the test, you will get a confirmation whether the controls are available, adequate, and appropriate. The most challenging aspect of using audit software is collecting the data, getting the data from the client. Quite often, the client is able to give you this data in a hard copy. For example, they could give you the books, but in terms of software, it becomes difficult to get the data. So you have to convince them that you need to have access to the data to be able to audit digital data. Let's go further. If you look at the audit cycle, they say this is what is involved. There's a planning, there's a field work, there's a review, reporting, and follow-up. This is the complete audit cycle. And there are different types of people who could be involved in this. It could be the audit leaders, the field auditors, or the data analysts. So it's important, depending on the type of audit, you decide what is the technology environment. Based on the technology environment and the internal control requirements, you need to consider that right in the planning stage itself. So that when you perform the field work, the requisite types of tests are performed. And you also need to know what are the type of technology resources you use. For example, if you have to audit application controls in Tally, you can actually use the software itself to identify whether the required controls are built in. Quite often we tend to believe that, okay, in Tally there's no controls at all. The basic reason is right in the beginning itself you have said for security and controls, when you create a company, you say security and access no. So once you set it as no, then everything is going to be no, there are going to be no controls. Then they keep on saying, no, Tally doesn't have any controls. It can be misused by any person. But if you have set the security and access at the time of the company creation itself to yes, and then you walk through the security and controls, then you find even in Tally, you can implement controls in a very good way. For that, it's important as an auditor, we need to know what are the controls which are there. Maybe we have to set up a test company and walk through it to know how this can be done. Then we can tell our clients also that, okay, you can implement security in this particular way. For example, if a transaction has to be entered, you can ensure that the person has access only to doing transaction entry. You can also set up an authorization mechanism that all the transactions which are entered by one person is automatically reviewed by another person. You can also set up that process even in Tally. Okay, if you want to use data analytics, this gives you a quick overview of how this has to be done. You decide the audit objectives. Based on the audit objectives, you decide what are the tests you're going to perform. You decide what are the data you're going to collect, in what format the data is going to be collected. You decide the type of tests you're going to perform the tests, collect the evidence, and then based on the evidence, you decide what are the findings. And based on the findings, you'll decide what are the control weaknesses and what are the remedial action to be taken and what is the decision about the audit opinion or the report. If you look at a simple business process, one example of a sample process, for example, sales order, you need to know in a sales order from a customer, what are the different processes it goes through, what are the different steps the sales order goes through right from the beginning when the order is initiated to the delivery of the goods and collection from the customer. At each of the areas there have to be controls and there are relationship between these activities. So you need to understand this process, and if this is happening in a computerized environment, you need to know who has access to this information at the different stages of processing of the sales order and what controls have to be there and whether the controls which are being built in are as per the enterprise policy. So in short, if you have to audit in a computerized environment, you need to understand what are the information technology resources of the enterprise. If I ask you one basic question, for all the clients you have a separate file, I know most of you have, and if I ask you in that particular file you do have one paper, just one sheet which tells you what is the technology they have used. Can you tell me what is the hardware they have, what is the operating system, what is the database, what are the applications? You find most of you may not have that information at all. Okay? And that is one of the fundamental information which has to be captured. Because if you don't have that information, you cannot, I would say you're not really done an effective audit. And the most important thing is what you have highlighted. You need to know what is this mechanism in which the data is stored. What is the application software which is being used, because that will provide access to the information. Based on that only you can decide how best you can audit that environment. So primarily, if you are auditing in an information technology environment, you need to know what is the information architecture of the enterprise. Just like in a manual environment, you know clearly the transaction origination to its destination. You can trace the transaction from its origination to the destination. Okay. For example, you can look at the balance sheet. From the balance sheet, you can take up on head of account. Then you can go back to the original source of the document. Similarly, in a computerized environment, can you perform such type of a tracing of the transaction? Where does the transaction get originated? How does it flow? Who has got access to that information? If you can know that for all the key aspects, then I would say, yes, you have understanding of the information architecture of the enterprise. And if you can know that, probably, if you know how to use the data analysis software, you can do the same audit probably in 10% of the time using technology. But for that, initially, you need to invest time to understand how technology operates. So if you have understanding about IT environment, you need to know about the IT resources. You need to know about what are the applications and the data, what is the application software is being used, what is the format in which the data is available. You also need to know what is the database storage, whether the database, flat files, proprietary system, what type of system is there, because that will help you to determine what access you can have for that data. So if you look at data analyst skills, this gives you the broad idea about what are the skill sets you need to have. It's important you should be able to access data from what are the platform the data is available, what are the software that's our applications the data is available. So it means you need to know how to import the data from different IT systems and in different file formats. For example, if you're auditing Tally, now Tally gives you access to that information directly. You can use the various reporting features and get information, or Tally gives you access to export the data in CSV or Excel format. So you can export the data and you can import the data in in the audit software and do various types of analysis. Similarly, if you are using SAP, SAP also gives you various reporting features or query features based on which you can interrogate. For example, if you look at core banking software, in most of the core banking software, there are some audit features, there are some reporting features, there are some SQL queries. So if you know how to use that, then probably you can do a much more effective audit of that particular software. You can analyze the interpopulation, which means if you have 1 million transactions, so what will be the volume? You can do, using the computer, you can do 100% analysis of the data rather than doing sample checking. You can perform various types of data analysis. We'll see some examples, practical examples as we go on. You can also schedule the audit tasks as per the requirement, which means sometimes you may not be able to use your own computer because there will be concerns about the data security. So in that case, you have to schedule time with the auditee that you would like to use the enterprise computer for performing the audit tests. So you need to have access to the terminals so that you can perform the test. You need to get read-only access and perform the test. For example, one of my friends got audit assignment for one of the private sector banks for doing a concurrent audit, and he was told specifically that they will not be given any manual printouts. If they have to do the audit, they said, you identify the team you're going to send, we'll train them for 1 week on the software, we'll give you 2 or 3 terminals as required, and you're going to do we'll give you the checklist what we want you to audit. We want you to audit using the terminals, directly the software, and not asking for printouts and then say, based on the printouts, I'll do the audit. And you'll find more and more that becomes the case. So if you have to summarize how to use CAT, this gives you the understanding. We have taken the example of, let's say, audit software like SoftCAT. So SoftCAT accepts data in common acceptable formats. It could in the form of Excel, Access, or any other database format. So you need to see what is the technology the enterprise using, whether using SAP or a customized application or a Tally data, okay, which is stored on the different systems. You should be able to convert into acceptable format and import this data, and then you can do the analysis. You set up the test objectives. This gives you the areas you can audit, what are the test objectives, and what is the test methodology you follow. So you find in the case of a manual audit, you will have some test checks you will perform. In the case of a computerized environment, probably you can do 100% check. But if you know how to access that specific data and how you can perform the test. This is some samples of what are the type of controls you can set. For example, orders are processed only within approved customer limits, credit limits. You want to check whether all the orders you have been executed are within the customer approved limits. What you are checking for is the valuation. Similarly, orders approved by management as to the prices and terms of sale. All the orders which have been entered in this one have been properly authorized. Similarly, orders and cancellation of orders are input accurately. Similarly, order entry data are transferred completely and accurately to the shipping and invoicing activities, which means all the activities you have been shipped to the customer are also properly billed, and it's also been accounted in the inventory. So like that, you can set for each of the processes what are the controls you need to have, and you can validate it in the system, in the technology software, whether that particular controls are working as envisaged. This gives you some more controls. Whether invoices relate to valid shipments, which means all the shipments you have been sent have been invoiced. All credit notes relate to return of goods or other valid adjustment. Any credit note which has been issued is based on a particular requirement of the enterprise. All invoices issued are recorded, which means they have been accounted. So these are some examples of the data analysis techniques you can have. You have something called stratify the data based on particular band you can stratify the data, which means using this you can identify abnormal data. You can also classify the data to identify abnormal patterns. You can summarize the data to identify whether they are falling within particular controls. And you can also perform what is called as outliers, which means identify transactions which are beyond a particular average, which look a little abnormal or out of the pattern. You can also use Benford law. Benford law is a statistical rule which says that every transaction which passes through any set of random transactions will follow a particular statistical order. For example, the possibility the transactions start with 1 is 30%. Similarly, the possibility any transaction starting with 2 is about 17%. So you can do a Benford law analysis and compare it what is the actual percentage and then see if there are any abnormalities or patterns based on which you can do further investigation. Similarly, you have trend analysis. You can do a gap test to identify are there any gaps. For example, all the invoices have to be in a sequence, or all the checks issued have to be in a sequence. Are there any duplicate invoices or duplicate payments? Or you can also compare different types of records to check whether they have been entered correctly. So this just gives you some examples of what type of tests you can perform. For example, you want to search for altered invoices, whether the invoice which has been entered, whether it has been altered in the system. Similarly, are there any fictitious vendors? Similarly, if the goods not received but they have been paid or they have been accounted. Similarly, there are duplicate invoices, inflated prices. Now below that we give you what are the type of tests which can be performed. I'll share this presentation with you because I just want to give a quick overview of how it can be done. So are there excess quantities purchased than what is required for the enterprise? This gives you what are the type of tests you can perform. Similarly, are there any duplicate payments? Similarly, payroll fraud, accounts payable, in accounts payable. Are there any transactions which do not match? There are no purchase bills for that, but you have accounted as a credit. Let's look at some interesting case studies based on this now. Now you find based on this, although we call it fraud detection test, these are some of the controls you need to evaluate as a part of an audit process, whether you're doing a tax audit or a company audit. Let's look at some case studies to get an idea about how the frauds have happened and what could have prevented them. Okay, this is an interesting case which we did for one of the public sector companies in Bangalore, which involved duplicate invoices. Like I told you, this person who committed the fraud initially, he found that the person who was signing was not really verifying everything. So what he did was, for the invoices being paid, he took a copy of that invoice and got the original, from the original, he got the payment made to the original vendor. Okay. Then he created an account with the cooperative bank with that particular vendor name. The same invoice, once again he put it up for the management after 1 week and it was signed. The check was again with the vendor name. So this second check, where did it go? It went to his bank account with the cooperative bank. Okay. Now what he initially did was, he ensured that the same amounts were there. For example, like I told you, there's one invoice for 1,299, he started with that. He opened an account with cooperative bank with the same name. And any cooperative bank you can open. With some enterprise you need a rubber stamp seal, it's much more easier to open. Like that he opened 16 accounts in that cooperative bank. Okay. And he identified 16 of the regular vendors of this particular company. And for all this, every week, because every day they used to sign 40 to 50 invoices, every week he used to give that, make a copy of that, get that particular this one paid and deposit and then encash it. Later on, the bank came into, the bank adopted what is called as RTGS. So they got into RTGS, then he found there was no check signature. Now this is where he had to evolve his methodology. Earlier the invoice, everything is being done. So what he did was, with the authorized invoices, he got the signature to the letterhead on which the authorized signatories have to sign. He got it signed because he was producing that letter. Then once it was signed, he ensured that the 2 rows which are left blank. And after that he inserted the name of that company. And if you look at his audacity, he opened an account in the same branch where this company had. Okay, with his brother-in-law, he opened one more account with another fictitious company, and now there's no verification, no control on how much is there. So what he did was, in Excel, he entered the company's name, entered the amount, and he put a whitener on the total amount, and he entered the total amount. And he ensured that Excel format, whatever he is doing, the total figures, everything was typed correctly. And they went to the bank, submitted, and the bank did not even bother why the whitener was being applied. Because most of the case we found most of the payments were through the whitener itself. Because for him it became very easy. So instantly the amount was paid and it was transferred to the account. And finally, the technology itself became a savior. The general manager was once reviewing the accounts and he found the bank began getting more details because it's automated. He found the name of the vendor. He said, this vendor we made payment. He is not a vendor at all. Then he made some inquiries. He found this payment has gone to some other company which is not related at all. Then when they did investigation, they found they had spent so much of money on this. What is surprising was, just to give an idea, they put a 10-member team and they worked for about 2 months going through all the purchase, invoice, everything for about 3 years transaction that took. And they found he started with 1,299 and he ended with about 25 lakh rupees for one transaction. Finally, he had frauded more than 6 crore rupees. And finally, it was found because by mistake the general manager was just reviewing and he found this particular transaction. The best part was, this person was not even a confirmed employee, he was a temporary employee and he is taking care of everything of that company. And the people who side didn't know that they were being frauded like this. And now finally, recently I met the general manager, he was telling me that the bank has accepted its fault because they should not have approved these transactions with this whitener and they have agreed to reimburse the cost. Then the amount they have agreed to pay is about 3 crore rupees. And this person, although he is illiterate, he is maybe just PUC or something, this fellow has committed a fraud of 6 crores and they are not able to trace the money. They put advertisement, newspaper, everything. They were only able to find about 70 lakh rupees from one guy who came and said that I have sold property to him, I got 70 lakh. So if this is frauded, I will return that money. Other than that, they have not been able to trace. The company, the bank, the case is going on. Now the cooperative bank did not give the details at all. Now when we had to do the audit, now if you remember, they had done all this investigation, then the management decided, the president or the MD decided we want to have an independent audit of this. They called us to do the manual verification, because all the verification you have done, is it correct? Now the auditor who was appointed for this called me and then we went in. I said manually you have to verify, these people have taken 3 months, 10-member team. Now they want us to do the same verification. We said I think it is not possible. We asked them whether this data is available digitally. They said yes. So we got the data from the software they are using. We got all the bank information. And from the bank information, we were able to analyze what is the name of this particular person, because the bank gave a statement, these are the pay accounts he had from the cooperative bank. Similarly, from the nationalized bank, we got the list of the account he had. So from that, we were able to match and find out what are the transactions for which the fraud has happened. The company did not share the details of what are the amounts. They just gave the details because they want us to independently verify. So using this digital data, we are able to analyze and find out, okay, these are the transactions where the fraud has happened. And we are able to finish this probably in 10 to 12 days, which has taken nearly 30 man-months because using the software. Now the challenge was when we were using the software, we found we are using this bank data. Now we later on found this person was in charge of the bank data also, because he was sending the input to the bank, this one to the accounts. So the bank book which was being generated from the computer also is not reliable. Then we had to change our approach. Then he said we will download the statement directly from the bank. So we download all the statements month-wise for 3 years, consolidate everything, and based on the data from the confirm, we are able to relate to the information which is there, payment which is there based on the account, etc., and we are able to find out. Similarly, we are also able to find out, okay, whether this employees, for each of the employees, whether they got a vendor account like that, we are able to do different types of tests, and we are able to find out the frauds. So just to illustrate, if you know how to use the computer and you use analytical skills, you can do the fraud investigation much more faster. Okay, this is an interesting case which I read only yesterday. Now this gives you a simple case. I'll quickly run through this in 2 minutes. You find that the 54 million fraud has happened. The largest municipal fraud in US history. The question still falls. This is what they're saying. A treasurer of a Illinois town with an annual budget of 6 to 8 million embezzled 54 million over 2 decades. Okay, how did this scam go undetected, even though there are 2 independent accounting firms who are doing the audit, and there are annual audit by the state regulators. Okay, so there was one lady called Crundwell who was a long-time employee. She began working for the town in 1970 after high school. She was the treasurer. She launched the fraud scheme in 1990. Okay, she opened a bank account, fictitious bank account. She began transferring the funds. Okay, now the problem is that placed too much of trust on that particular employee. Some of them would question why this is happening, and she gave them some reasons. No, budget is there. We have not received the amount like that, and they were convinced by her. Okay, which means there is no independent verification. There is no segregation of duties. Okay, now the other thing was, whenever you interacted with this person, like this enterprise also, this person I was told was the most obedient employee, was the most hardworking employee. Any person you ask him to do anything, he'll sit and do it. Okay, so that is one of the characteristics of fraudster. They found this person was very, very sweet, who could answer everything, do everything. Okay, they learned was that trust without verification is an issue. So they found that segregation duty is an important aspect which was not done. Similarly, because segregation duty was not done, it allowed her to set up and operate a simply fraud scheme. This is what she said. She opened an account and she deposited the checks in that particular name. And she created fictitious invoices based on which the payments were made. They also lavish lifestyle. She had about 400 horses and she spent so much of money. So what are the lesson tips? They said strictly enforce the existing controls. What are controls so that they have to be implemented? And the employees need to be trained in fraud awareness. Okay, let's look at one more. I think Anand talked about this last week. I'll just give you what happened in this particular case. This Society General. Now the $7 billion loss caused solely by this person. You find he built speculative positions. Last time I discussed that. He was a low-level trader, not supposed to have any position. He misused the application software for which he had access which is not supposed to have. He also misappropriated the IT access codes and he falsified the documents to justify all the losses incurred. So what was done? This gives you an idea about what did he do. He created an illusion that all these losses he debited to a customer's account and showed that it is an amount which is receivable. And the problem was they did not do a supervision to review whether these controls were existing, and this person never took leave. Okay, all of you know this. Okay, now let's look at interesting what happened. Now we'll just see here, based on what we discussed so far, what are the controls which you discussed could have prevented this. Okay, you find what has happened. The modus operandi for the billing company's standard billing system, it was used to generate false invoices. In fact, one of the earliest fraud which happened in a computer environment by an insurance company, which generated fictitious insurance policies and show higher revenue because of which the director could get a good bonus. And that's where the profession of EDP auditors came into existence, because how this fraud was not detected, they found manual audit procedures could not detect. Then there is a need for an EDP audit profession which came in. So we found this is what has happened. 7,561 invoices found hidden in the invoice management system, worth more than 51 billion. So all these invoices were hidden using super user ID. This was shown as receivables from the party. Okay. So what are the lessons you can learn? There are computer system weaknesses which have to be reviewed. So if there is a super user ID, you need to know who is the super user, what can he do. You also need to get confirmation directly from the party, not from the company. Now there is a difference in confirmation, you need to investigate immediately. You overlook the cockroach theory. What is cockroach theory? It says that if you find one cockroach, be sure that there are not one, there are many. Like in the example here. Similarly, in this one frauds also, they say if you find in stock investment, they say there's one thing which is there. If you find a company says there's a problem in one place, you'll be 100% sure there are so many cockroaches there, not only one. Okay, fail to rotate the key staff. Anything can be faked. So what should happen is there should nothing but a good old-fashioned audit could have prevented this. Take fees which are high, this is one thing. So you find charges against the PwC, this is what they said. There are 135 control deficiencies. The information technology reported stated IT systems Satyam were subjected to manipulation. This is what they said auditors did. Okay. Now with this we'll have a quick demo of audit software to get an idea about what can be done. That's all. What happened to this? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm going to tell you about something about how we can use MS Excel and eCAT. This is an add-in developed by an Indian company. This is a CAT tool. This is a data analysis tool. which could help in fraud detection. And the idea is to identify red flags. What you call red flags is called fraud indicators. This is the first step before you go into the fraud investigation. So this can give you hints or certain patterns and certain trends wherein you have to apply your mind as an auditor or as a management, and you have to find the patterns. Okay, this may be a fraud indicator, and then you further drill down into it. So this is a particular tool. See what kind of frauds can happen. See, in case of Satyam or in case of WorldCom, they wanted to inflate the revenues and suppress the expenses so that the share prices look little glossy, and they wanted to continue it, and they got stuck in that pattern and they kept on doing it. So either they want to inflate this thing. This is done by the top management or by the internal employees, wherein they do a fraudulent activity wherein they want the cash out of it. They may have duplicate invoices, or they may cut down on certain invoices, or the employees themselves may act as vendors and take out the cash out of the company. And then there are certain tools in which you can identify patterns, and then you can further investigate into it. This will be done through pivot tables and trend analysis. So let us see how fictitious vendors. This is one kind of fraud done by your employees who are actually registered as your vendor as well, and they try to take out the funds from the company. So this is a ECAT tool that I'm going to use. Now I have a list of employees, their addresses, and I have a list of vendors and their addresses and the vendor number. Now this is a huge data, so we need some technology, some backup. Otherwise, it's humanly impossible to identify it. So we go and we have this particular tool. So those tools are actually relationship builder, relationship builder. Okay. Called relationship builder, which actually compares these two sheets where we extract this from the database of the company. And we have this we have this employee sheet, and then we have this vendor. We compare these two fields, that is employee address and vendor address. This is a hypothetical example. Obviously, you need to cut down, you need to separate the PIN codes and the addresses, and there'll be spelling errors, and then you have to apply your mind basically in order to identify it. So when you apply this tool, where is this employee? Okay, right now it is not working. So I'll just show you what the result that comes out. So this is the kind of report that is generated, wherein this software generates this report, and it actually compares two fields, and this is a list of fields it has identified when the employee's address and the vendor's address are matching. From this you can take actually the hint that there could be fraudulent activities happening within. Then you have other kinds of tests basically. Identify duplicate invoices. These are duplicate vendor invoices also. The vendor might be trying to do fraudulent activities. So we go to this sheet and try to use a particular tool to identify duplicate invoices. We have this particular add-in wherein we can use VLOOKUP and all this, but this is a particular ECAT tool wherein we have just simplified the process. You can just go to, if you want to do a gap analysis, just go to gap analysis and do it. If you want to do a duplicate, and you can use Excel tools as well. But in Excel you have to keep putting formulas and doing it. This is a ready-made package for you. So here we identify duplicates. You have collected a list. You have a sample list, and you identify duplicates. So the software generates a number of the lines where you have identified duplicate invoices. So there are chances that this may be a fraudulent or this may be error. Then there are missing invoices wherein you have a number of invoices missing. Probably in the purchase invoices may be missing. There's this particular test there's a function called sequence test. When you go to it and just put in that particular field, invoice number, I want to check whether it is in a particular sequence, and then it gives a result. Okay, these are the missing invoices. 1012 is not there, 1035 is not there, 1042 is not there. Similarly, you have inflated prices. A particular limit is set to certain prices, or certain credit limits are set, or beyond which you're not actually permitted to go, and when employees actually transcend that limit, you can find it out. So we'll do this authentication check. You have this purchases, and then you have this another sheet called limit. The common fields you are linking. And then you have this purchases. You want to see those purchases that exceed the limit. So this is a report that is generated. It shows you the purchases that are beyond those limits. So then further you investigate into it, why this went beyond. Is it by the employee themselves, or is it the management gave the permission for doing it? So this is another indicator. Then you have no purchase orders. Invoices are issued but no purchase order. So we can use this tool called gap analysis. This is also, everything can be done through Excel directly, but we have this ready-made add-ins where you can go and identify numeric gaps, date gaps, character gaps. We'll do gap analysis, numeric gap, for identifying gaps in the invoices and whether there are any missing invoices. Purchase orders rather. Purchase order numbers. With the invoices without purchase order numbers, that could be a fraudulent activity. So these are invoices which do not have a purchase order number attached to it. So you further go and investigate why these invoices did not have a purchase order, and who purchased it, where the money went from. Then you have Benford's law. Just now he told this is basically identifying patterns. You have a certain patterns developed, and this can give you a hint in further investigation. So you go and find the Benford's law. 96. Where is the Benford's law? Analysis 96. Okay, it's here. So Benford's law will do an analysis of the amounts. Basically, there are several criteria that Mr. Benford had given. So we'll compare the amounts. We expect the digits starting from number 1 to have 30% of the to be 30% of the total number of amounts in a random collection of numbers. But in this case, it is only 15%. And then in this, you can see in number 3, there's a major difference of minus 28 of the variance is minus 220. So you can further drill down into it and investigate actually what has happened, what is actually the transactions that are related to the amounts that are starting from this number. Then you have pivot table. Pivot table is basically an Excel tool which can help you arrange the complicated tables into specific patterns, so that in a specific way, so that you can actually draw inferences from it. See, this is a pretty complicated data. You have country, customer name. Then manually you cannot basically identify what is what. So this is a particular tool which can actually help you simplify the analysis. So it selects the data. Now, if you want the analysis country-wise, say, and you want the quantity and the amount that you have earned country-wise, you can have this in percentage. You can have the quantity in percentage as well. Show value as percentage, and the show gross value as percentage. So it basically gives you an idea for decision making as well as for identifying certain patterns. Then if you don't want it country wise, you want it customer wise, you can just customize it. You get a customer wise details. You will be having an idea, okay, this customer is actually giving this much proportion of the business, then why is it so much? Then you can go and have it period wise. Period-wise, again, this particular tool can help you. See, there are particular fraud detection based on period. There are particular hours during which the business is not supposed to be done. So if you have that kind of a data where hourly business transactions are recorded, then you can actually use this timeline and okay. Okay, this group is hidden, that's right. Group selection. Yeah, here you can even have minutes and seconds. If you have that kind of a data, you can identify businesses happening out of the normal working hours. So right now I am doing it, say quarter-wise. You can do it year-wise, minute-wise, quarter-wise, and this gives you basically an idea. Then finally we have this trend analysis. Trend analysis again basically is to identify patterns and trends. You can go to ECAT and you can use this MIS tool. See, this is a complicated data. It's a daily a report of a daily sales happening. So you can just make it into a monthly sale so that you can identify. And once you have this monthly sale data, we can actually use this. The trend analysis can be done using a chart, and you can have this trend lines. It actually shows you what is the trend. Where there's a downward trend, there's an upward trend. Even the average then can indicate you actually what has happened. So that's it. Thank you.
See, in using audit software, what is important is being able to know what is the data available and what are the type of tools we can use. If you use even a simple tool like Excel, and there is a function called pivot table, and probably you can learn this pivot table in about 10 to 15 minutes. But if you know how to use pivot table, you can do any number of analysis. Just to give you an example, let's say you get data from Tally pertaining to sales which has happened. Now you want to verify whether the monthly sales which has happened has been done correctly. So just export the data of the sales from Tally to a table and copy this data into Excel, and then use a pivot table and apply this. Okay, you want product wise, you'll get this instantly. Product wise, number of transactions total. Similarly, you want rate wise, you can get this information. You find you can get this analysis directly. Similarly, let's say you export all the transactions of the company. If you are exporting all the transactions of the company, and if you apply this pivot table, let's say you apply it to the ledger name, and you pick up the debit and the credit total, then instantly you are getting a ledger. Because what the pivot table does is, it summarizes all the transactions as per the ledger name. So you can immediately compare with the ledger and check whether the Tally has posted the transactions correctly. So it could be Tally or any other software. Okay, before you go further, I thought I'll just show you two small videos. Sorry. Just see what happens after this, and I want to tell you what is the moral of the story. Okay, what is the moral of the story? Sometimes what appears apparent may not be really apparent, may not really be true. There could be certain things which are hiding behind this. Let's look at one more. If you have understood the moral of the story by just this last video, I think you got the message which I wanted to convey in this presentation. Okay. In a manual environment, if you look at this phishing, the traditional phishing, the person is following a particular traditional approach. Okay, whereas the person who is doing phishing in the modern way, Okay, using a different techniques, it dives down, picks up what you want. In the same way, in a computerized environment, it's important that you need to know where the data resides, what are the different technology layers, and using the data software or the software itself, you should be able to investigate, pick up what you want. So finally, you are interested as an auditor is to evaluate the evidence and confirm whether the controls are working, whether the possibilities of fraud are minimized, the possibility of risk are minimized. Because primarily what you're providing is an assurance to the management. So this is where you should know what is the IT environment, what are the controls which are available, and based on that you should be able to provide assurance to the management. To summarize the discussion we had, this gives you an idea. So primarily what we are looking at cyber fraud, the role of auditors is there has to be governance, management, control and assurance of the technology environment to ensure that the frauds are minimized and they are detected proactively. So you need to have the governance structures and mechanisms which has to be supported by the management policy, procedures, standard guidelines and practices. You also need to create employee training and awareness and have a system of continuous monitoring and control. You also need to ensure, because compliance is not now just a management requirement, it's required by law. So you need to know what is the compliance requirement as per law. For example, if there is the Information Technology Act, the Information Technology Act says that this is what you need to comply with. Similarly, let's say clause 49 says that you need to have an enterprise risk management. You need to be aware of what are the applicable clauses and how you need to comply with this. And what the management requires is timely assurance on a proactive role, to play a proactive role. Quite often in the traditional audit, where we are doing this compliance related issues like tax filing, everything, we come in after the event has happened and then provide assurance. But in the case of a computerized environment, we can bring in more value addition if we can be proactive and provide consulting in that particular area. So if you're controlling cyber fraud, this gives you a general awareness of what you need to, what are the control areas you need to have. You need to be aware of within the organization whether there is a risk management or risk culture awareness. What are the type of risks which are there, what are the type of controls you need to be there, and there is a need for implementing controls. The management also needs to know what are the type of threats which are there, what are the vulnerabilities, and they need to have a regular assessment internally or externally. Fixation of responsibility becomes very critical because you need to ensure segregation duties. In most of the frauds which happened, you find the reason was lack of segregation duties. You also need to have proper policy. Management needs to have proper policies, procedure, practice in place, which ensures that the controls as required by the enterprise are implemented. Even as per the regulatory requirement now, if you look at clause 49, there is also what is called as a whistleblower policy, which means the enterprise should have a mechanism whereby people who identify frauds or errors can, frauds or any other misdemeanors within the company, they can independently report without being revealing their identity. And there has to be risk measurement and there has to be detective mechanisms in place. So this gives you some of the resources which you can access. I'll also make a part of the copy of this presentation available to you, which you can review. My objective in this presentation was to give you a quick overview of the type of regulatory environment which is there, the impact of the information technology on controls, and as auditors, it becomes incumbent on us to review the controls to provide assurance to the management. Quite often we tend to believe that we are doing a statutory audit or tax audit or a company audit. This is not in our domain. Now, if there are frauds or errors which have happened in a computerized environment, we need to have the requisite skills. Now, I'm not saying that we need to have expertise skills. That's why I did not cover the expertise technical areas pertaining to computer fraud. I covered only areas where a general chartered accountant who is supposed to exercise due professional care has to be aware of. So using this presentation probably will give you indicators of where you need to get started. Now this slide should summarize all that we talked about. Audit is all about adding credibility or trust to the data which you're auditing. For example, if I'm doing an audit of a financial statement or of a company's report or tax audit, I'm adding credibility. I'm adding trust to that particular report. And as far as trust is concerned, they say the most expensive thing in the world is trust. And can take years to build it and a matter of seconds to lose it. So thank you very much. I hope this presentation is useful. Now we're open to question and answers. Yeah?
Is it linked to the data to the software directly, or is it linked to the Excel? We have to bring the data to Excel and then use the ECAT?
Yeah, so if you look at ECAT or any family of software, this is an add-in to Excel, which means you already have Excel. This is software we install, which will add one more module to Excel. Like you have different menus, no file, view, edit, etc. Similarly, there will be one more menu created called
No, I mean
ECAT.
to say that whether while making that ECAT usable,
Yeah.
should we link that to our software?
No, you
The
don't
things,
need to link. You don't need to link. If you can open that file in Excel,
Okay.
you can use ECAT and do all the functions of Excel. ECAT, let's say, I've got about 60 functions, 80 functions which are there. If you can open that file in Excel, you can just click on the ECAT menu. ECAT will be one more menu in Excel. You click on that, you can see, or you can do all the functions.
Any data that can be imported to Excel.
Okay, that needs to be imported to Excel.
Yeah, it has to be file has to open in Excel. If you're
No,
using
there is
ECAT,
one, a company where I'm working, we have an option where we have the data entered on Sage, like Tally. So from there we, in Excel we have an adding, where we can pull that data, whatever is there in that software.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know whether this is the same.
No, there are separate software for that where you can actually pull in, that's called as continuous monitoring tools, where we can directly pull in the data based on which you can implement on a card. This doesn't provide that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, any feedback on how the presentation? This you see, I watched last week's presentation and I found that probably depending on the topic, I found there are certain things which have to be covered. So I also covered those things in this particular presentation. I'm glad that most of you are here, where last week are also present here. And the presentation was quite fast-paced because that's how I wanted it to be. Because I want you to get an idea about what it's all about. Because if you have to learn audit software, probably like I told you, if you have to learn audit software, let's say like ACL or anything for that, there are different types of courses. And they're also now with the internet available, you can learn quite a lot of things online. So the best thing is, my objective of my presentation was to ignite the spark of interest in you, so that you invest some time and start using it. So thank you very much. Thanks, Praveena, for this opportunity.
Sir, a quick review of whatever you have done. You always do excellent presentation. There is no doubt about it. On behalf of all of them, I thought I'll give a good feedback on you that you are always there for us and your presentation is remarkable. Thank you. Friends, as you were telling about a pivot table, we in the Bangalore branch also have faced many times challenges. When we had this 39th regional conference, we were having huge data of around 4,000 chartered accountants coming in. We wanted to have the registration process very smooth. That time we used the pivot table to understand how many chartered accountants are like who are above 60 years old, and how many chartered accountants are coming from different parts of the state and different parts of the, apart from our own state, we have people coming from different parts of the country. Then we use the pivot table to understand how many people are coming from Coimbatore, how many people are coming from Delhi and all those things. Based on that, we decided how many registration the tables that should be put so that we'll have a very smooth registration. So that is the power of Tally. I just wanted to share this with you. I request our Pad Shiram Shankar to propose a formal note of thanks.
Friends, I am sure all of you have enjoyed today's session. So please give a big round of applause once again. Now I request our chairman Ravindranath to give the memo to the briefing. And a royal handshake to So thank you very much for your interactive participation for the today's session. Before concluding today's meeting, just I wanted to remind that tomorrow we have Independence Day celebration, and 31st of August and 1st of September, you know, All India Students Conference. I request all of you to depute all your students for the conference. Thank you.